It's an honour to have been invited to take part in this special event for Geoff, particularly in this wonderful venue that you've found is remarkably appropriate for Geoff's background, as we've heard earlier on. What I want to tell you about are some of my encounters with Geoff and his work, and really I'm doing this in terms of some samples from a timeline. So let me tell you a bit about these particular points in time. In fact, quite a lot of my focus is going to be on recent times. We've had the history of the Bradford group covered very thoroughly by Geoff and by others, and I'm going to focus on some things that happened in the 2000s, the late 1990s, a period between 2004 and 2010, which all sort of took shape around meetings in Oxford, and also Geoff's book that has been referred to, The Riches Beneath Our Feet. And then in the very late 1990s, the first meeting of the UK chapter of the System Dynamics Society, or rather the first meeting of people in this area in the UK, and also what we came to know as the Journal Project. I'll then go way back in time to 1978, to a brief visit I made to the Bradford group at that point in time. And then also, because this session and this event is about the legacy Geoff left us with, and also about the prospects for System Dynamics, I am going to say something about the future, 2012 plus, in terms of some ideas that really have to do with a future that has been shaped by past accomplishment, because that's what Geoff did. He accomplished a great deal, as you've already seen, and I'll refer to this through reference to Dynamica, the journal we've heard about, his leadership, and also some comments on his insights into social history. So, Oxford. Here we are in 2004, and this was the meeting of the International System Dynamics Conference that took place at Keble College. And the theme of that conference in 2004 was collegiality. By this time I knew Geoff very well, and so this was a great opportunity to sort of catch up. We hadn't actually spoken for a number of years. The Oxford conference was actually a great success. It was for the international system dynamics community. It was capable, it drew in some 400 participants from all around the world, and was organised by the UK chapter of the System Dynamics Society. The conference chairman in overall charge of the entire event was Jonathan Coyle, and the program chairs were Mike Kennedy and Graham Winch, who designed the content of the program. As I say, this brought in a very large number of different participants from all around the world, including a huge chunk of the North American academic community in system dynamics. And the conference took place in this wonderful, tranquil surroundings of Keble College, which had been Jonathan's college as an undergraduate too. The theme was collegiality, about the potential for the field to enable people dealing with complexity in business and society to engage in discussion and dialogue about that complexity. And also, if you like, to understand each other's points of view as they tried to put together and piece together an integrated view of how things are working and operating in business and society. Now, another thing about collegiality was that collegiality continued after the day's events at Keble College, and we all walked off to the Royal Oak pub, which was conveniently close by to the college, and many of the participants enjoyed a number of beers at the Royal Oak. And we all came to kind of appreciate the environment there too. And Geoff and I quite liked the sense we had of just sitting down together and talking things over. in the field, and we liked the location enough that we in fact continued to meet there, just the two of us, subsequently, almost every year from 2004 all the way through to 2010. So, what is it that we were up to there? Well, that brings me to Oxford and book writing. A number of references have been made to Geoff's book, The Riches Beneath Our Feet, and it really is a wonderful book. While we were at the Royal Oak, we discussed our work. We talked about the state of the field and the curious workings of the academic world and Geoff's book. And it became clear that Geoff really loved mining, and he really knew about it too. And he used his skills as an academic to compose what is truly a compelling history of the industry. And if I just read just one sentence from this quote here, it might give you a little sense for that special insight and enthusiasm he had for this industry. For more than 4,000 years, Britain's miners have, to quote Job, brought to the light fabulous mineral riches. Now, conveniently, the publisher of the book, Oxford University Press, was located just across the Woodstock Road. So Geoff would meet with his editor in the morning and then join me at the pub for lunch, where we discussed these various different topics that I'd mentioned. Now, if we step back in time just a little bit more, we come to the late 1990s and the beginnings of the UK System Dynamics chapter. And I think a number of people this afternoon has referred to the ability of Geoff to draw people together, to communicate to them the field and to get them engaged. And this was one example of doing this. The first UK meeting of people in the UK, all over the UK, coming together in Faringdon, Oxfordshire in 1996. And what I have here is a letter that Geoff sent out. By this point he was at Cranfield University at the Royal Military College of Science, and here you can see him, a letter being composed in May 1996 for a meeting taking place on the 16th of May 1996, sent out to all people that he knew of, and we knew of, who were working in system dynamics in the UK at the time. Thank you for your interest in the above meeting. I'm now writing with further details and a location map to tell you how to get to where this event is taking place. And this was, if you like, the precursor to the founding of the UK System Dynamics chapter, which was officially formed in 1999 and has gone on to do many, many important things since, including, of course, bringing together this event and the Oxford 2004 conference. Following on from that meeting also was the journal project. This was a project to put together a collection of papers that got published in the Journal of the Operational Research Society. And this was a project that occupied a couple of years from 1997 to 1999. And this was really the time when I got to know Geoff quite well, because this was a big job. We brought together 18 different academic papers and put them in this one volume. Here's a picture of the journal cover from the time. And, what was the purpose of doing this? Various things that Geoff wanted to accomplish through this. One was, it had not been that long since UK and system dynamics had been around for 25 years. So it was partly to follow on the celebration of 25 years of the subject in the UK. But it was also to try and reach out again to a very, very important community, the readers of the Journal of the Operational Research Society, which is the oldest operational research society in the world, and communicate to them an up-to-date image of the field and its impact in the areas that the journal was looking at, particularly the idea of system dynamics being used for strategy policy and management education. And to do that by showing a representative sample of current and contemporary work in that area. And so the journal was organised in 4 main themes, which enabled us to communicate this message. Just to give you a sample of those themes, one was about where is system dynamics now being taught in the UK and Europe. And then there was a whole section dedicated to here are some policy applications in a wide variety of areas, both in business, in commerce, and in the public sector too. And you'll have gathered from previous presentations here this afternoon the range of applicability of this subject. So under the policy heading were a variety of examples of work being done in corporate diversification, deregulation in the electricity industry, some important work on healthcare dynamics, which has been a big subject in system dynamics over many years. And then there was a whole section dedicated to what impact does this subject and can it have on policymakers? Because that has always been an important aspect of the subject, that one wants this subject to have the ability to influence the way in which people who have the power to act choose to make decisions. And so a number of the examples in the special issue cover that very topic. People who have actually been influenced by this work, who are responsible for running organizations, and also the ways in which the subject has been injected into management education in a wide variety of different contexts. And then finally, a theme that was to do with system dynamics and current methodology. The subject is very much alive and well and has many different threads to the methodological base, and some of that was sampled here too, including Geoff's own work on optimization and simulation. In fact, the title of his paper in this was Simulation Through Repeated Optimization. So now I'm going to step way back in time to 1978 and a visit that I made to the System Dynamics group at Bradford back at that particular point in time. And that was really my very first encounter with Geoff. I was still then a graduate student at MIT, and I visited the Bradford System Dynamics group on a trip back home to England. And I remember vividly now showing up at the management centre, it was then called, that was set in spacious parkland in a leafy suburb of Bradford. And here's the Cartwright building of the Bradford School of Management as it is today. We heard from Eric earlier on, his house actually happened to be based right close to this beautiful location, and there was even a secret entrance to the grounds from the back of Eric's house. And the curious thing was, it was really quite a far cry from the world that I had come from, which was the System Dynamics group at MIT. And here's building E40, typical of MIT, they give a number to their buildings. But this was a factory building. And what was at Bradford was, of course, a very different, elegant building, which in fact is nicely caught and pictured in Bob Cavanaugh's picture, which really gives you a sense of the old building that's in the background rather than the newer one. So these institutions, the buildings themselves, looked a lot different. And even the MIT building was even more factory-like in those days than it appears to be here after a very substantial facelift took place. Before this, it really looked like a factory building, and inside the building I still even now remember that as you walked into this massive building, there was literally an industrial elevator inside, the size of a complete room, and you stepped inside this and went one floor up to the System Dynamics group, and there was even a button in the elevator you could push called inch up and inch down, which enabled you to level the elevator in line with the floor. So you can tell this was a rather different context, but the thing that was in common in these two institutions was system dynamics was being done. There weren't that many places where it was being done. It was being taught in a number, but there were very few places where the subject was being done in depth. And here were two of them, the Bradford School and also at MIT. And so back then, there wasn't really much communication going on. It was a relatively small field, and I think you do have to understand just what a novel field this was back at that point in time. It emerged out of contemporary ideas in computing and information feedback systems of that era. And even today, many years later, this in academic terms is still a pretty new subject. Academic terms normally means ideas that take shape over decades, 50 years, 100 years to get established. This is a new field and was particularly new back then. So communications between centres were limited, and of course we've come a long way in the 35 years since then. And today we have an International System Dynamics Society that Kim mentioned. Kim is currently president of the society. If you can read on that little picture there, it says system dynamics is everywhere at one point, and that is actually true nowadays. System dynamics is going on in many different institutions, and there is a wonderful society that's put together that coordinates things and activities throughout the world, including the annual conference that takes place. So we've come a long way, but the thing that we needed, and what I want to switch to now is, if you like, we needed and we still need leadership to create space for good work in the field. And that's what Geoff provided. And that's why I want to switch now to, let's move and think a little bit about the future of this field as it has been shaped by those kind of past accomplishments. So I'm going to use as my example Dynamica, a journal that's been mentioned on a number of occasions here, but as a product of leadership, and this idea of a future that is unfolding for us, but is in fact shaped by past accomplishments, many of which were Geoff's. So here you see pictures of the front covers of the journal, and it came in two different forms. There was the pink version in the early days, and there was the blue version that came along later. A lot of work was done here. Now, it may seem strange to you for me to put Dynamica, which is an archive journal from the 1970s and 80s, centre stage in talking about the future. But let me explain, because when I came to write this stuff down, I was really trying to understand and try to convey to you too the essence of moving the field forward, any field this is. And it seems to me leadership is a vital ingredient. And that means having the confidence and the self-belief and mastery of your subject to make it legitimate in the eyes of others. And that's one of the things that Geoff was doing. It also takes a really massive and sustained effort to create space for a research team in an academic environment, which I have to tell you, you may not always realize this, but all academic environments are highly contested and extremely competitive. That scarce space to be able to do things, people are always trying to bid for it and take it away from you. And Geoff managed to open up a space in which many other people were able to learn about the subject over an extended period of time. And Dynamica gives you a sense of that, just in terms of the information that's there, and that Eric had also talked about. There were 10 volumes and 23 issues spanning 10 years before it was reborn as the System Dynamics Review. More than 100 academic articles were published by a whole variety of people. That's what I call creating academic space. Just think how many people have been influenced going through this group, being able to write about it. So it's a tough job, and it seems to me that's one of the things that Geoff did particularly well, and we need to be able to continue to do that kind of thing in the future. But let me illustrate it with one more slightly more tangible example from a piece of work that was done in the early days at Bradford. So, leadership in action. An example. What I've got here is an archive article on forecasting and business dynamics by Graham Winch that comes from Dynamica, Volume 2, Part 1, Autumn 1975. So here's an actual picture of the abstract from the journal. And what this archive article illustrates is the development of talent and capability through applied research, conducted in a supportive organisation. And by supportive, I mean the following: an organisation where good work is enabled, is valued, and is expected too. It's all three of those. University departments provide such environments, providing you create a bit of space in them. And that's, of course, exactly what Geoff did. So let's just look at what Graham was writing about at the time in the group that Geoff was leading. The dynamic implications of forecasts. A nice, pithy abstract, not too long, not too short. Some examples showing the way that such forecasting characteristics as bias, errors, sampling and delays affect the dynamic behaviour and performance of corporate systems. Okay, so let's continue from this, because I want you to see what it was that was happening here that enabled Graham to do this kind of work. Now, Graham is here in the audience, so I hope this example is not going to embarrass him too much. It may be hard to imagine either Graham or me as eager graduate students, but let me assure you that's what we were back in those days. And here, though, in this quote from the article is a glimpse of Graham's early work that demonstrates Geoff's academic leadership in action. Let me read you the first paragraph here, and then we'll think about what it means. Geoff Coyle, director of the Bradford System Dynamics Group, has described an interesting phenomenon concerning forecasting error. It came to light in a study of a large consumer durable manufacturer which devoted considerable effort to forecasting. So, the first paragraph shows us an important topic, the value of forecasting. It has the endorsement and support and interest of the group director, Geoff. It's grounded in a practical business situation. This is not abstract stuff, this is actually well grounded. The director has set up a research group in which it is legitimate to investigate this topic in depth. Now, let's examine the content just briefly. Imagine just for a moment this is your topic. So you've got to look at this forecasting issue. And the first question to ask is, could you imagine yourself being able to spend 6 months or even 3 years looking at this topic? And I would say to nearly all of us in the room, we couldn't imagine doing that. How could you possibly carve out that amount of time to work seriously on a topic? And besides which, what is there to study? Surely if you have a better forecast, that's going to give you better business performance. Well, it turned out there was a lot to study here. There is a genuine puzzle in this situation. Large errors in forecasting in this manufacturer turned out to make no difference at all to the firm's performance. And this wasn't just an esoteric and abstract academic speculation. It was coming in the context of a company that was seriously using forecasts and thought they were extremely important. And in many cases they are. But the point here is there was a learning opportunity here of the kind that a well-led research group makes available. And the project shed light on what we in the subject of system dynamics know as compensating feedback, which is the tendency of an organisation which is made up of many interlocking parts to sense pressures for change and to self-correct or compensate accordingly, either for better or for worse. So in this case, it was for better. The organisation, it turns out, even though it couldn't foresee the future, was actually very adept at compensating for surprising things that might happen in that future, and actually coping extremely well despite not having great forecasts. Oftentimes in system dynamics work, you get the opposite sort of compensation, in which a firm senses a need for change but also kind of resists it too, and that prevents progress taking place. So the future of the field, it seems to me, relies significantly on generating opportunities of this kind and connecting them to talented students. And Geoff was able to create this environment, which I'll call a sort of Goldilocks research environment. Not too abstract, not too applied, not expecting instant answers, that's important, but still expecting some serious study, some deliverables, and some insight. And Graham was one, if you like, of the gung-ho young students that Geoff was able to attract. And we need more people of that kind to lead research groups for the future. Incidentally, just to put in one more little example of this creating opportunities for learning, Graham was also the founding editor of Dynamica. This responsibility was ably thrust onto him by Geoff when Graham complained about the difficulties of getting system dynamic work published in the existing mainstream journals. And Geoff said, don't just complain, do something about it. Start a journal. It seems to me that's a great example of another learning opportunity created, which Graham followed up on, and so Dynamica came into being. So I want to end here with some comments on leadership, resilience, and social history, and really a memory I have of a visit to Geoff last year in August in Shrivenham. Now the photograph you see here is from the cover of the Riches Beneath Our Feet book, and it actually does remind me of my chats with Geoff at the Royal Oak. In fact, when I look at the picture closely, it might almost have been taken right there in the cosy bar room. I don't know whether it was or not, but my final chat with Geoff was at his home in Shrivenham last August. And the thing I remember quite enduringly in this, that despite his illness, Geoff remained remarkably positive and resilient while I was there. And he told me of his current book writing work on military history, and he gave me his book on mining too. And it seems to me in these recent accomplishments, alongside all the other things that people have talked about in Geoff's work, are more pointers for the future of system dynamics. Because these books are not only about mining and military methods, they're also about social history. How and why things change in society and in organizations. Geoff, as a system dynamicist and a former mining engineer, was able to get into the world of mining, to understand why owners, miners, and mining communities acted in the ways they did. And if you like, the vision, the goals, the forces, and needs that motivated them and shaped their lives. And from this descriptive database emerges a story, in this case, a fantastic book, a rich narrative that reveals how segments of society are connected and how things change through time. And a similar approach, it seems to me, is needed in system dynamics, for good applied system dynamics. Even though we use diagrams and equations to represent how parts are connected, and we use simulation to infer how the story works out over time. But despite this formal mathematical underpinning, there's a need for reliable, descriptive data and real-world case material to enable the modeler to discover, if you like, the covert structure of business and society from which dynamics arise. And Geoff was good at doing that. That's been emphasised over and again. He was effective at creating a learning environment, and he expected ideas not only to have academic content, but also to be applicable in the real world. And so, to finish, I'm going to return to the Riches book, and something very, very special about the book, especially, I think, for this audience. Because in this fascinating story, Geoff's personality shines right through the prose, the clear and crisp prose that he wrote. And you can almost see and hear him talking as the paragraphs unfold. And this is a quality of the book that another close colleague, I think, who's here in the room, David Exelby, has also noted too. And so let me just take a moment to read the quote here that's on the page. And I also invite all of you to later read the quote on slide 4 in full too. So Geoff says here, a social change in parallel with the growth of the salt industry in the 19th century was the formation of workers-friendly societies, aimed at supporting members in distress, but also at convivial entertainment through tea parties, brass bands, and the like. The pub also played a part. And yes, friendly societies and their chapters are important, and Geoff has helped forge those, and the pub also played a part.